There we go. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Ward. I go by Polar on Twitter, and wanted to talk a little bit about burnout. And I know that there are some people who have had conversations about this, but I think it's a very important topic in our industry, and wanted to continue that conversation. So we have a small audience in the room here, and I'd appreciate you guys jumping in and asking questions, adding comments, experiences that you want to share, feel free. So first of all, I want to talk about what burnout is. There are several definitions, and it varies depending on where you look. The official quote-unquote definition of burnout was generated by Christine Maslach, who is kind of the expert on burnout in not just the InfoSec industry, but in general. She's really the one who brought the science, the psychological science behind burnout to the forefront. And she really talks about emotional and interpersonal stressors and long-term how that affects your attitude, your cynicism, your energy, and your effectiveness in your organization. And that's an okay definition. It doesn't really get to the heart of what I think we struggle with, but we'll start with that. Another definition, the Wikipedia definition, is a psychological term that refers to long-term exhaustion and diminished interest in work, which to me sounds like retirement. So I don't really think that's a great definition either. So, but when we start getting further down and looking at people who deal directly with people who are very burned out, we start to find that it really has to do with how much effort you exert and how much reward you get for that effort, right? And so, people who see this on a regular basis, the failure of the existential quest. Why am I here? Why am I doing what I do? And when I get up in the morning to go do that, do I really have the energy and drive and desire to continue? And that's really, this final definition I think really gets to it, the gap between expectation and reward. So you have very high expectations. If you don't achieve those, or even if you do, the effort that you exert to make that happen can be very high, and it leaves you questioning if it's worth it. But we're going to go through and talk about a little bit of this, and how to manage that. I want to give you guys some thoughts on what I've done personally to try to manage my burnout. I've been through it several times, and I think I'm kind of getting to a formula to manage that and head it off the pass and keep myself in a healthier place.
What inspired you to give this thought?
Well, my own personal experience, for one thing, I've been through it several times, and really the second time I went through burnout, I thought I had resolved the issue the first time, and obviously when I went through it again, I had to face the fact that I didn't actually resolve it, and all the things that I had done to try to prevent it didn't work. And so this is really kind of years of experience and having gone through this, and some things that did work well for me. And I think if people can kind of start maybe with some of those things, they can avoid some of the distractions that didn't really, they made my personal life better, but they didn't resolve the problem, right? And that's really what I see a lot of, is people making changes, but not ultimately addressing the problem. And that's really where I think we need to get to. So why do we talk about burnout? It's very high profile. It's a thing in the industry right now, and it should be. It should continue to be a thing in the industry because we see a lot of it, right? We are, and I'll talk a little bit more about this as we go on, but we are a very susceptible group to burnout for a lot of different reasons. And it really pains me to see a lot of my friends and coworkers who are in this industry as well struggle with this, and there is no support group for them. There is nobody reaching out and trying to head them off at the pass and put them back on a healthy path, right? We have to take care of one another, and people don't understand our industry like we do. So if you see somebody struggling, you really need to reach out and try to help that individual and keep them in a healthy headspace.
Do you have an example of other industries that maybe have a more mature or not that problem?
Yeah, I mean, the military, the law enforcement, and some of the mental health, industries really focus on this. People who are direct caregivers or crisis responders have very mature processes to deal with this. But we're a young industry, right? And the people side, the wetware side of what we do is very immature. We're just starting to figure out that, what are the problems of having 15 years of exposure to, telling people that the world is going to be the same tomorrow as it is today, when we know that it very well may not be. So that takes a toll on an individual, and we have not figured out how to deal with that.
It's not. Remember in summer camp, those of us that went to summer camp, you didn't go in the canoe or the sailboat or the pond alone.
That's right.
And
And
at the very least, in the military and a lot of other things, the buddy system, we just suck at this.
police have a partner for a reason, right?
Right. And it's easier to understand why you don't send 2 8-year-olds out, 1 8-year-old out the canoe than.
Yeah, well, and our industry supports that, right? If you look at the hacker stereotype, it's the lone wolf. It's the person who's up till 3 in the morning researching, sitting in front of a computer, very sedentary, living off of, Dr. Pepper or Mountain Dew and, crunching data. I mean, it is not a healthy stereotype, and people, especially people starting out in the industry, think that that's what it's about. So we're setting people up through that stereotype and through lack of engagement processes when we see them going south, and really, as an industry, we don't help people recover there either. So it's a problem that continues to feed on itself and get worse.
Forgive me, somebody shut up.
No, come on in, Jack.
The airline industry is a really interesting study in this, because they take, well, where's the risk? So there was a couple of years ago, there was the flight attendant who flipped out, popped the door, grabbed 2 beers, and left. That's just kind of embarrassing. The people behind the locked door, they watch each other. They're trained to watch each other. Air traffic controllers are trained to watch each other. And it's why the people in the pointy end of the planes rarely screw up too bad, because first of all, they're double checking each other's work, but also they're double checking each other. And I don't know what got you into talking about this?
He had to work with me. I'm severely burnt out.
So what
Well, no, so Lance is a good friend of mine, and I've seen him struggle with this. I have personally struggled with this, and obviously, when you start looking into why, do I have a problem, right? Because a lot of this is just really undiagnosed out there, right? So we think that this is the world that we live in, and we need to just get over it and continue dealing with the grind.
We're smart enough and tough enough, damn it.
That's right, and I can do it on my own. I don't need you, thank you very much, right? So reaching out is, well, let me keep going, because this is all in here. So the personality that excels in information security is also susceptible to burnout. The reason why, we're not humble or social, right? We think we can do it all on our own, and we try to make that happen. And when we find ourselves in a bad space, the last thing that we're going to do is damage our reputation by reaching out and saying, I am in a bad space, and I need my friends to come and help me. Right? So as a friend of somebody who is going down that path, you really need to try to find effective ways to reach out to those individuals and help them get the help they need. And, really the third reason why I wanted to have this talk is because, and I'll use myself as an example here, you don't realize how bad you are, how badly burned out you are. And I didn't either. And as I was preparing for this, I asked my wife, there's a scale I'll show you in a bit, where I was on that. And where she answered and where I answered were very different from how I perceived myself and how she perceived me. And the dichotomy there really surprised me.
What about like negative reinforcement? Like and sometimes in software engineering, they say, well, you know, programmers are like fuses, and we're going to burn them out. We'll just get another one.
Yeah, that's a sick philosophy.
Right. So it's like we're reinforcing that, but isn't that counterproductive to having good, happy, you know, worker bees that are securing
It
us?
absolutely is. So, you know, when people use that as their excuse to take care of the problem by removing it from their organization, that just means that we have a bunch of hurting and damaged people who are now unemployed, and, you know, that's going to pile onto their depression and make things that much worse, and, you know, ultimately leave their next employer to have to deal with a problem that they didn't create, right? If that person ever gets back on the path of being employed.
What do you think about the whole, I don't know, I've seen it where people go into firefight mode and then they come out and it's almost like they're freaking out because they're not getting that adrenaline hit, and it's over. It's like a very vicious cycle.
That's right.
Kind of like Hurt Locker, the movie is kind of what I reference when I talk about that, but I've seen that happen many times too.
Yeah, you've seen organizations live that, right? Whole entire organizations where they're constantly in triage mode, and they do not know how to operate outside of triage mode, and they think that when they are not in triage mode, that they're not doing their job, right? That is a sick corporate culture.
Is that a type of burnout?
What's that?
Is that a type of burnout? Is that on the spectrum?
I think that leads to burnout.
I think that, and we'll talk about more of why that leads to burnout, but that is definitely a contributor, right? And as a leader or manager of people, if there are any of you in the room, and I hope there are, you know, this is really something that you need to keep an eye on to make sure that your employees are healthy and are able to contribute long term, right? So sometimes managing a workload effectively is very painful in the short term, but in the long term, the rewards are much greater. And I think that's a lot of what leads to that. When you're trying to be everything to everyone all at the same time, you know, that's an impossible expectation on an organization, which leads to impossible expectations on individuals. So that expectations versus reward is already skewed just by the culture of your organization. So the stages of burnout, I'm not going to read all of these to you, but I will point out that, you know, stages 1, 2, and 3 are really what sets you up for burnout. And these can go on for a very, very, very long time, years, where you are a highly productive individual, and organizations love this. And it doesn't always lead to burnout, but it often will, given a long enough period of time. Where organizations start to become aware of a problem is as you move into displacement of conflicts, where somebody walks up to you and asks you a simple question, and you respond in a way that is incredibly disproportionate to the question that was asked, right? With anger, frustration.
But that's what security people do.
Well,
Wait a minute.
Yeah, you probably need to check that, right?
My answer is
Go
no.
on.
So one of the other things is, you know, and that, I mean, you said it, that's what security people do. So people don't recognize that as a sign of a problem, right? They just say, man, that security guy, he's always so wound up. I don't understand what's wrong with him, right? And as we go through, you know, a lot of these criteria for burnout are based on social interaction. So a lot of the standard measurements that we use to determine if somebody is burned out doesn't really apply to us, because we're already such a selectively social group that our social interactions don't exactly match up to the general population. So when you look at this from a very clinical perspective, you know, there is a lot of burnout that is specific to the InfoSec industry that is different than general burnout. And, you know, I think that there's enough difference there that we probably don't see a lot of that clinical diagnosis where, you know, there truly is a problem, right? Because as we go through some of these lower levels or higher levels of burnout, you know, we get into things that deal with how we interact with people. Withdrawal. Well, if you're withdrawn, you know, people think that you have your head down and you're getting work done. They don't see that as a problem, right? They don't see you removing, they don't see you revising your values to where work is the only thing that you care about. And your family gets none of your time or attention because you're so focused and committed, and you think that's the way that you should be to do your job effectively. They don't see the behavioral changes necessarily, though they might start to get a clue there. Where organizations really come into play is at the higher stages of depression, where you're dealing with the autonomous response, the deeper you don't, your friends notice the change, you're not interacting with them, your coworkers, you don't have good interaction with them. You're going through the motions, but you have the blank stare, right? Every question that you respond to begins with a sigh, right? It's every answer is, well, I have to explain, I have to go educate this person before I can even have the conversation that I want to have, and I really don't know if I even have the energy to do that.
How does self-analysis work? Like if you tried to look at yourself, and said like, I'm burned out, how effective is that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So this is my example. What I did was I looked at this and tried to figure out at my worst stage of burnout where I was on this continuum, and I rated myself at a 6. I thought I was denying emerging problems, but I definitely had displacement of conflicts because I was frustrated with people, but I thought that 6 was about as bad as I got. I asked my wife to read through the description of each of these stages and have her rate me without any influence, and she immediately said I was at least an 11. Right? So that told me that the mechanisms that lead to burnout also change your values and make you not realize that you're as bad as you are, right? So you need to have some type of external mechanism to give you some indicators that you're going down this burnout path.
But we always go alone, so we don't know.
That's true, but you don't really always go alone. There are people in your life who are giving you feedback on this. They're transmitting, you're probably not receiving, right? So there's definitely some dissonance there. Causes of burnout. I love this quote. Trying to figure out why pickles had turned into pickles without analyzing the vinegar barrel, right? So if you look at the individual pickle, you're never going to understand what created that pickle. And it's the same in our industry. There's a lot of external influence that causes you to be burned out. And that's not just InfoSec things that are happening. That can be the economy. That could be, any external influence that changes our industry, that causes pressure, that forces you to operate at a higher normal stress threshold. So working too much, unjust environments where the reward doesn't equal the effort. You're not getting a lot of support. I mean, does this ring a bell with anybody? I don't get any support. Nobody understands what I do. Right, yeah. So, where you're unable to affect change, right? You're beating your head against the wall every day and nothing is moving, but you think if you beat your head harder against that wall, it's finally going to move. That wall isn't going to move, right? Serving values that you loathe. If you're doing something, if you are working for a company that provides an ultimate end that you don't agree with, that can create internal conflict, which leads to stress. And insufficient reward, right? Reward, it doesn't always mean money. It can be praise, it can be satisfaction, right? So, this is almost the definition of the InfoSec industry. Plus the personality traits that lead to good InfoSec individuals. This is just kindling waiting to be lit. So all it takes is a little bit of external influence, and we're on our way.
So when you say little support, I'm assuming, I just want to throw this out there, that you're talking about like even the fact that a lot of us in this room and here will go to talk to someone, and you feel like you're talking to the wall.
That's right. So what we do is very specialized.
It's not their fault. It's
That's
just
right.
they don't understand what the hell you're saying.
That's right. So they don't live in the world that we live in, right? So trying to go have a conversation where you feel like you're having effective communication with somebody outside of this industry is very difficult. So it's very therapeutic for me to be on Twitter and to see that everybody else is dealing with the same exact problems that I am, And I am not, in fact, alone, right? These are very common issues. And, we don't have the answers, but at least we're not alone in the struggle, right? So if you look around and you're the only one on the battlefield, you're feeling pretty alone, right? There is no support. But if you're looking around and you see these digital feeds coming in that say, yeah, I understand that, suck, and I'm right there with you, then, that's a very powerful thing. So if you're feeling alienated, make sure that you reach out to the community, because they will respond and they will help you. But, and just being a part of that, seeing that information come through is very therapeutic if you are not able to convince yourself that you need to reach out. Just participating in those conversations and seeing other people being frustrated as well will be helpful.
Tell me to shut up anytime. I want to throw out the reason that we started trying to formalize what we did a few years ago was that there were a couple of us who sort of kept an eye on each other. So Josh Corman and I, Martin McKay and I, golf sponsor and I, each other, and if you look at the list of people, we had at various times sort of, hey, when I saw you at Source or RSA, you look kind of rough, what's up? And that drove us to say, all right, look, instead of just talking among 5 or 6 friends who are our mutual aid society,
Right. Yeah.
let's do it. And
Group accountability is
but our egos and this sometimes make it hard to reach out, as you talked about.
Yeah.
I don't need help.
Yeah.
Right.
I have a question on that one. I think it's not just, in my organization, I'm by far the biggest social butterfly, and that's not huge, right? But when I have tried to reach out to people who are outside the field, the communication is always a little bit off. When I come to a conference here, I'm like, oh, everyone here's really to understand what I'm saying. Because even on a security operations team, I'm generally the only researcher. There's a big difference between I do this job 40 hours a week and wow, I enjoy it enough to do it on weekends. It brings me pleasure and joy providing the puzzle.
Right.
That overthinking, that drive for curiosity makes me probably one of the most difficult people on any team I want to manage. And I'm told that frequently. I'm never told, wow, your curiosity drive has been a huge benefit for our organization.
Right. So welcome to being a true InfoSec person and not a, cut and dry like firewall administrator, right? I mean, that drive to understand is really what makes an InfoSec person an InfoSec person, right? If you're digging, if you're researching, if just because is not the right answer for you, then yeah, you truly are a part of that community and susceptible to all of this, right? Yeah.
Explains the fixation on unicorns and rainbows too.
Yeah. Heavy stuff, right?
Why do you think though that because management seminars typically teach managers to try and focus on those types of
No, they don't. No. Management seminars are really not, I don't think, I've been through a formal management training track, and they never touched on this at all, right? They are not, business managers don't look for this in their individuals, and they're definitely not trained to deal with this. And if you come to them with this problem, 9 times out of 10, they're not going to know even where to send you to start getting help, right?
Well, maybe
And,
they do.
You look like you maybe have had a different experience, and I hope that's the case.
The management folks that I've worked for in the past that are professionals, and typically management professionals along in this field, they're not looking for the 9 to 5 person. They're looking for somebody that has a passion for it, and they're understanding of that.
Yeah.
And what I personally think what you've seen in the management field, if you will, is most of it has gone to hack and slash management that just caters to the competition, not to the company and the individuals.
Right, so,
Can I ask what size organizations? Because I think the size of the organization makes a huge difference.
absolutely.
Well, also, are you
Because
talking
I work
about
in-
specifically an IT type person manager, or are you talking about just a manager?
talking about both.
Okay.
And I'm talking about both small and large. But in some of the corporate wireless, AT&T Wireless, and some of those other businesses, I've had the privilege to at least get glimpses into. And in most of those cases, they did really well for a time at promoting that. And then what I typically saw happen was a takeover and management style.
That's right.
And I think that's more
So
the
the question,
commercialization.
so I think the focus there is, as a management team of an InfoSec group, are you interested in immediate return or being able to provide a long-term consistent result, right? If you are incented to provide an immediate return, then you are going to do what you have to do to provide that return. And if that means burning out your people and having husks of individuals that are left when you're done, and you're okay with that, then that's what you're going to do. You know, a lot of leaders don't even know to push back on those unrealistic expectations that are being brought down on them. They have to be successful. They have to meet their numbers to get their bonus, and they're going to do whatever it takes to make that happen. Now, we are finding that that doesn't work, right? As an industry, people are becoming aware that the minions are fighting back, and they are starting to renegotiate the expectations. And the expectations coming down and the expectations coming up do not meet. And now I own a gap, right? How am I going to fix that? I'm going to have to renegotiate back up the chain of what I can actually accomplish in a reasonable amount of time. That's a good thing, right? But that's not going to happen proactively, right? These managers aren't going to do that until they are incented by their workforce to do that. So I think that's part of what I'm looking out of this is some type of groundswell to say this is something serious that we need to do collectively. Yes.
I'm a little curious. I've been in the field now since '96, and the people I think are the best managers for IT security, particularly researchers, have reached the point where they want to be done. They're also burned out. Is that what everyone else is kind of seeing? Another thing I've noticed is their personalities. They're good IT security manager. They tend to be very, very, very different than the other C-level execs in the company, and it's not being successful with the company politics.
Right.
So again, our team loses most of the time until there's an incident. And we're blaming for a while, we get a little bit of reward, and we go back to the cycle again.
Right.
Is that what everyone else is seeing?
Yeah, to a degree, yeah.
Yeah, I think some of the best managers that I've had are so burned out that they don't know what to do with themselves, but they are so busy trying to take care of their people who are also burned out that they can't deal with their own, right? And there is no support group for them, right? They're in the same boat we are. So, yeah, I think that's definitely, what we're seeing. And, I don't know what the standard deviations were on the original data that Jack and company put together for RSA, but it would be interesting to see what the different scores are by level in the organization and see what the deviation is amongst those groups. But I have a feeling that you're not going to see a lot of difference between InfoSec managers and the general InfoSec practitioner.
Yeah, there were very few patterns that we could really stick pins in.
Right.
In other industries, moving up the food chain tends to add pressure, but also adds reward. I'm not sure that the reward, I'm not sure the ratio works out for us.
Right, exactly. It's not a one-to-one, right? So these are things that you really need to try to be aware of in yourself and try to negotiate as you talk with your employer. You can go renegotiate the terms of your relationship. There's risk involved with that, but ultimately, if you're going to be happier, it might be worth the risk. I do want to talk a little bit about the survey that I did. I sent a note out. This was kind of last minute, but I wanted to see where we fell. I know that we did some polls. I went back and looked at the data, and I couldn't directly correlate the pre-existing data to the questionnaire that I used. So I'm not going to go back and I'm not going to try to correlate that, but if you look, you see some similarities in the way the original data came in and the way that this survey came in. And some of this I think is unique to, is just a part of being in InfoSec. I mean, we're cynical, right? It shows that we're cynical. We all agree that we're cynical. The deviation on this is very low. Compared to the general population, we would expect InfoSec people to be much more cynical because it's almost a survival tactic in this industry. Exhaustion, that's part of our culture. We work incredibly hard. The expectations are incredibly high. And, it's interesting to see that for all of that effort, for all of that negative emotion that effort generates, that the reward, the effectiveness is actually a little bit lower than the general population. Right? So we're working harder, our attitudes are worse, and we're getting less done than the general population of people that they've surveyed. So I think that this really kind of points to, again, a little bit of sickness in our culture, where if could we reduce our effectiveness a little bit and gain back some of our time, reduce our exhaustion, improve our outlook a little bit? Maybe, I don't know, but I hope so. And then, the areas of work life survey, which the AWS and the MASLAC burnout indicator are the two kind of accepted mechanisms that the mental health industry uses to determine burnout and causes of burnout, which they're not great. They don't really apply to our industry very well, but they're kind of the best thing that we have, so that's what we use. But if you look at this, the interesting thing is in our industry, our workload we feel is lower than the general population. We have more control over our work. We have more reward. We have about the same amount of community involvement. We have, greater fairness, and, we typically align with our organization's values. So the fact that all of these indicators say, basically, we should be happier than the general population. But when we go back and look at this data, we're not. So there's something that these tools are not capturing that is causing us to be more burned out than these tools can measure, right? That they can, there is no cause and effect relationship here that we can directly correlate. So, I think that even if managers were trained and kept a pulse on this using these types of tools, which I think you should attempt to do, you're still going to have to do the basic sniff test, like look the individuals in the eye and see if they're being effective in their work, if they're contributing, and if they're engaged. And if you see that start to slip, you're going to have to get involved and try to figure out what you can do to help those individuals. Yes?
How would you get that person, so if you notice that behavior, how would you get that person to admit that there's a problem? If they're going to stage an intervention and...
That's a good question. The reality is that person probably already knows there is a problem.
You said before you thought you were at a 6 where you were really...
Yeah, but the thing is, I knew there was a problem. And the reality is that you're going to know there's a problem. Even if it's just, I really don't want to do this and I don't know why I can't motivate myself to make this happen, right? That's a very initial stage of burning out, right? You're not interested in doing the thing that your organization has hired you to do, right? So, if you see effectiveness or contribution diminish, that's a good sign that you need to put eyes on that individual and try to understand what's happening with them. And, sometimes a very direct approach works well, right? And you may not, if you're the manager, you don't even have to get them to admit that there's a problem to help intervene and reduce their workload and pull them out of some of the things that they're committed to. I mean, this is a sickness, right? It's a self-feeding situation where you feel like you have to own everything. You have to be all things to all people. You get very territorial. You get very cranky when people start removing you from these things that you feel that you need to be involved in and that are not going to be successful unless you are a part of those efforts. So as a good manager, you are able to help the most, and your employee is going to hate you the most for doing that because you're helping them, but it doesn't feel like you're helping them. It feels like you're removing them from doing the thing that the way that they add value to the organization, so that it can feel to the individual like you're putting them on the path out the door, when really what you're doing is putting them on the path to being in a more productive space and a healthier space. Not necessarily. I mean, I've had managers do this very poorly, where they did this to me. You know, the second time I got burned out, I had fortunately a good graybeard manager who just started doing these things. Right? He started pulling me out. What's that? That's right. So effective communication is important here, right? So that was my point. Is he was helping me the most, but I couldn't see that. Right? I didn't understand what was happening. And, you know, we didn't have the direct communication of, I think this is what's happening with you, and this is what I'm going to do proactively about it. But that's what was happening, right? He had my best interest in mind, but I couldn't see it. So make sure that you communicate with people that, and it doesn't have to be, hey, I think you're burned out, right? It can be, I think that the expectations that this organization has placed on you are a little bit unfair. Right? So we are going to readjust those expectations, and we're going to back you out of some of this, and that means, you know, certain things to the business or other team members, but we're willing to do that to make this fair.
Yeah.
Management function, right? Manage the risk and allow some things to fall over a little bit, focus in on it.
That's right. And I'm going to push back up a little bit and reset some expectations so that I can maintain the health and long-term contribution capability of my team.
So some of those things which will almost always be counterintuitive is when people around you start getting burned out, they're not helping other people, and they may punch out. They may go crazy and they say, okay, you're now removed from the equation permanently, you've been deselected, or they may leave. And that will cause an impetus for your employer or your boss to say, oh my gosh, we can't have another one of these, and I'm really concerned that this guy who's a good guy is not going to be able to do his job. Not because of personal, but professional, valuation. And they'll say immediately, like, full stop, go over here, you get to go on a paid vacation. And that looks very counterintuitive to you. Like, what is going on? Why am I being punished? Now is not a really good time for this. I mean, we're down, people. We don't need to be removing me and putting me on the bench. And then usually the same language they use with the people that were deselected could also be used with you if they're not communicating very clearly, and say, no, I insist, because there's a bigger thing I'm worried about here than just you.
Yeah, you have to have, maintaining those relationships is important, and understanding good communication, understanding what's happening around you.
Yeah, and they could be scared. They could say, I really don't want to talk about your job right now because I'm afraid it may send you over the edge. And so that might break some communication pathways, because that might be the only thing you want to talk about is going in there and securing the heck out of it.
Yes.
Like, one of the things that I've started to learn, as I get more into my career and I have more than one job problem, I've started looking for those indicators that, hey, it's not me causing burnout, this organization is never going to help me, and I probably either don't work anymore, or I'm not taking the jobs they're offering me because they have all the indicators.
Right, and you
Organizations that burn me out, but I can't sustain this.
right. So being able to detect an unhealthy environment is definitely important, and how you react to that environment is critical too. But to recover from burnout or to prevent it, you're going to have to change things, and change is very difficult and uncomfortable for people. But I can guarantee it's a lot more comfortable than having to deal with depression and severe burnout and depersonalization. So it's really a game of where do I want to apply control? Do I want to wait till the very end where automatic systems are kicking in and forcing me out of this situation? Or am I going to take ownership of this, renegotiate my expectations and commitments, and really manage a better work-life balance for myself? Right? And that's what a lot of people don't do. They expect their employer to do that for them. And a lot of employers, especially in this industry, they don't have the bandwidth to deal with that, right? That's why it's really important for us to self-regulate, not only, at an individual level, but also at a community level. Right? So keep an eye.
We do have a heightened sense of self-importance.
No.
Because of the work that we do.
Yeah.
So the reality is, if we walk on the job, the business keeps going without us.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, it might be painful for a little while, but it might be less painful than dealing with your attitude, right? Yeah. So what do we do about burnout? And I spent a lot of time thinking about this, trying to boil this down into some simple steps, right? Number one, you have to realize at an individual level, if you're going to get better, you have to realize that there's a problem. And this can take a long time to get to, right? This is your point earlier, right? That what if somebody won't admit they have a problem? Well, they're not going to fix themselves, right? So you're going to have to intervene on their behalf. But once you know there's a problem, you're going to have to figure out why the problem exists. And, this is easy to skip, right? People move on to making other changes in their life outside of their work environment that ultimately improves the quality of their life. But it doesn't fix the underlying cause of the burnout. It may give them more stamina, it may push them back a few levels, or give them some relief. But the burnout isn't really getting any better, right? So we have to figure out what those stressors are that are causing a burnout situation, and make sure that we can start putting together small changes to impact those stressors, right? A lot of times, expectations and commitments drive this. I've overcommitted myself, or somebody has overcommitted me, and I need to now go back and renegotiate those expectations, or as gracefully as possible, rescind some commitments. And do this, don't punch out completely, or you can if you want, but you don't necessarily have to. You might start with some small changes to say, well, if I reduce my expectations a little bit, does that improve? Make a small change, evaluate, and adjust your plan accordingly. Taking care of yourself, I think, is critical too. So there was a good talk on depression earlier in here that a lot of these same things apply. Get enough sleep. Sleep directly impacts my mood, and I'm sure it does with you as well, whether you're aware of it or not. Your diet and exercise, these routines will definitely impact how much stamina you have to deal with burnout, and how much garbage you can take before you start to break down. Enforcing downtime, this is hard for somebody who is used to working 80-hour weeks to enforce a stopping time and go home and have meaningful relationships with individuals, because it feels like you are slacking on the job because you have reset your values to where the job is the only thing that is important to you. You have to reset those values, and it's something you have to do forcefully. It's not a comfortable process. And find a purpose outside of work. These are just suggestions, but typically if work is what you're living for, work is what you're spending all your time on and what you're obsessing over, which is what caused you to get to this situation to begin with. So find find at least one thing, but hopefully several things that you enjoy outside of work that you can invest your time and effort into. Some other things that you can do, make sure that you understand what your stress behaviors are and when they start to kick in. So when you get stressed, do you eat? Do you obsess? What are those things? And this might be a good time to talk about the buddy system, right? Where you might not even realize those things are happening, but somebody who you trust or who you authorize can, they can tell you that you're exhibiting these signs and that they think that you need help, and you let them tell you those things without getting frustrated or upset, and take them at their word and start making some changes.
Yeah, I think this is key to be proactive, is that you need to set up those ground rules beforehand, because people could be beating you over the head with obvious indicators and you'll ignore them.
Right.
That's part of the reinforcement.
No,
of
I
the
mean, this
problem.
has to be a very fundamental thing where you agree that, you know, I'm going to tell you and you are going to listen to me and we're not going to argue about this, right? This is, I'm going to tell you and we are going to go do something about that. And if that is, you know, go to the bar and have a conversation about what sucks in your life, that's fine. But, you know, we're going to talk about what we're going to do to start making this better as well. And some of those things require simple changes. Some of those things are not even work, right? You might be burned out in things outside of your work life that are impacting your work life. So, you know, there is a lot of influence here that, you know, that can come into play. But I think the biggest thing that you can do is allow somebody to tell you that you have a problem and then allow them to help you overcome the problem. Long-term management. Things outside of work may be contributing to the issue. Things in your job role or career that don't fit your personality are going to create stress. So, you know, if you are a square peg in a round hole, you are going to be stressed, right?
Man, I really hate malware.
Right, and so if you're working for a company or your coworkers don't share the same values as you just don't fit on the team, that creates stress. That you know, you need to at least be aware of that and have a mechanism for dealing with that long term. Start building long-term plans to resolve areas of conflict in your life. This is, you know, for me, this has been a year-long journey. I have changed job roles. I have moved locations. I mean, almost everything in my life except my family and my close friends have changed. And it's created ultimately a better life for me, but I still find that there are times that I'm burned out on my day-to-day job and have to manage that. And, you know, after you kind of figure out how to create this balance, you really need to work to maintain that. And I think that, you know, the way that you do that is through aggressive expectations management, right? When somebody comes at you with an expectation, you need to make sure that you and they are on the same level as to how long that's going to take to accomplish and where it falls on your priority list. And make sure that, you know, there are some things on your priority list that are being accomplished that are important to you that make you feel that you're contributing. Because if your contribution list consists of conference calls all day long, you don't feel ultimately impact change in your organization, you know, you're going to feel that your efficiency is very low. So that's the end. I'll open it up for any questions or conversations, but if you want to read more about this, there's some very good references out on the internet. I will be releasing the data set, removing all personally identifiable information and organization information. So if you want to see the raw data that I used to build the couple graphs I put in there, plus some of the statistical analysis around standard deviation, things of that nature, I'll release that on the polar.org website, and as well as the finalized report that consolidates all that data and lets you see all the results. Any questions?
Just a
All
car.
right. Thank you, everyone. Oh.